We all want to live in stable, healthy communities, but fostering that kind of community requires that we create diverse housing options. If we're only building for high-income folks and we're building nothing for folks who are our essential workforce, our cities can't survive, right? Pinellas can't survive, right, in the long term if we're hollowing out the diversity of options that people actually need to live here and thrive here. Folks all around Pinellas who need affordable housing, not just low-income folks. There are a whole heck of a lot of middle-income folks who are struggling to find a decent place to live in a thriving community. When people say not in my backyard, most folks are not mean-spirited. It's not that folks can't figure out that, right, they don't want folks to have a great place to live. It's that they're concerned about their own financial future. They're concerned about what's going to happen to my property values, what's going to happen to the equity that I got in my house, what's going to happen with my kids. And so a part of the opportunity is to say, listen, you think that you're losing something, right? Because we're trying to build more affordable housing. But let me tell you something. You should be more concerned about what you're going to lose if you don't lean into affordable housing, right? When you don't lean into how we plan out a Pinellas County that actually works, means what you get. And I will say this, when cities that did not plan well for the growth that they were experiencing are starting to look like San Francisco. You don't have to make the case to builders. I think builders are ready to do it. You just got to incentivize it so they'll do it, right? There are very few builders, that are going to take a loss, right, to be able to make sure this happens. But they certainly are willing to do some additional work around low and moderate income housing. There are all kinds of ways we can meet this challenge. Maybe accessory dwellings are not for us, but maybe mixed income or mixed use development is. Maybe it's, adaptive reuse of material. I don't know, but wow, look at the possibilities in this moment for creating innovative solutions. Wow, let's lean into that.
Good morning, and welcome to the fifth and final session of the Homes for Pinellas series. I'm Jill Silverboard, Deputy County Administrator and Chief of Staff for Pinellas County. This is the last of our 5-part virtual series focused upon ensuring affordable homes in Pinellas County. In today's session, we'll be talking about how a housing compact will help us achieve this objective. The video we just saw was a recap from our Session 1 keynote speaker, Dr. Tiffany Manuel, or as we better know her, Dr. T. We wanted to share that video clip because we're beginning today by reviewing some of the most important things we learned in the past 4 sessions. Over the last 7 weeks, we talked about changing the conversation from problems to solutions and how the need for affordable homes affects us all. From teachers, nurses, and first responders to people who keep our grocery stores open and make our tourism industry possible, our community needs the people who need affordable homes. And the more it costs for them to live and work here, the more expensive it will be for all of us. Housing affordability is a community-wide issue. We heard from people who build affordable homes. They told us the single most important thing we can do is allow more and different types of homes. Not everyone wants a single-family home or an apartment in a large building. With careful planning, we can provide options that fit within our neighborhoods, like garage apartments or accessory dwellings, or multifamily infill that's designed to look like single-family houses. We talked about bringing back missing middle housing in neighborhoods, which is not a new concept, but a casualty of past market trends and rising housing costs. We also heard about the importance of local governments encouraging affordability in innovative ways and reducing development barriers. These range from assistance with land cost, density bonuses, reduced impact fees, and even small expenses like tree replacement and water connection fees. Others incentivize transit-friendly and sustainable designs. Many communities in Pinellas County are also working to make the development approval process as smooth and predictable as possible. All of these measures help create more affordable homes. Last, we learned that affordability is about more than just housing. For many households, transportation is almost as big of an expense. The average Pinellas County household spends 33% of its income on housing and 24% on transportation. Because we don't have a robust transit system in Pinellas County, residents are dependent on owning and maintaining cars to get to work and many have to live far away from their jobs to find homes they can afford. This puts strains on both workers and employers who need a reliable workforce. We need to plan to connect affordable homes with good jobs along transit corridors with robust service. In the end, having a range of housing options for all income levels helps everyone. Now, I'd like to circle back to one of my favorite parts of Dr. T's conversation with us, a point she captures in a really simple story.
I was in a community where my kids had a great karate instructor, Master Charlie, an Irish guy of all things. Great, like karate instructor. They love Master Charlie. Oh my God. Every day coming home, Master Charlie. Master Charlie said this. Master Charlie said that. Okay, Master Charlie. Great Irish guy. He was great with the kids. And then they came home and said, Mom, Master Charlie's not going to be in karate anymore. He had to move, right? His partner, his spouse passed away, and he can't afford to live right in the same house with the mortgage. He just can't carry it. So he's moving. And so that was the first part. Second part was then they started to come, I don't want to go to karate, Mom. It's boring. Master Charlie's not there. So I mean, just like every day I'm trying to figure out what to do with these kids. They don't want to go to karate and Master Charlie. And so my affordable housing story is I need Master Charlie to be able to afford to live here. Master Charlie is central to my family, right? I don't care what we have to do. Master Charlie needs a place in this. We got to figure this out.
I think that story resonates because we have thousands of Master Charlies here in Pinellas County. Our Board of County Commissioners and our Administrator, Mr. Barry Burton, have made housing for everyone in our community a priority. Let's welcome Mr. Burton to say a few words about why a housing strategy countywide is so important.
Well, good morning. Again, I'm Barry Burton, the County Administrator. I'm really excited we're at today talking about how we can come together through this compact to advance our, common goal, which is to provide more affordable housing, more integrated communities along these transportation corridors throughout Pinellas County. As Jill just said, nearly 1 in 5 households are cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing and another 25% on transportation. It's very hard to live when when you're cost burdened like that, to be able to afford the simple things, in life and try to survive. So, at the beginning of this series, I spoke about our strategy to link affordable housing, affordable homes to transportation, to our job centers throughout the county. We're calling this strategy Advantage Pinellas. Advantage Pinellas, done through Forward Pinellas, is really brought all of our communities together to talk about common linkages and how do we advance these and to make our areas stronger. Working together, we can ensure that a solid approach for integrated housing and transportation occurs. You see, if you find a home that you can afford, as you just saw in that last video, but it's so far from your job that you can't get there, it doesn't solve anything. And many times that's what we have here. We understand we have a lot of challenges, including, our public transportation and other things, but crafting and having this countywide housing compact, it brings us together to have a unified approach, to pull all these things together into one system. And it's only by us ensuring that everyone has access to affordable housing, that it's not a problem that occurs in this city or that city, but that it's a regional issue that we need to come together to solve. Despite all these challenges, this year's brought a lot of difficulties in trying to pull resources together. But you know what? We've seen how we can come together and solve issues, especially this year. I'm so excited that we have partners in our cities and nonprofits and others that really want to make things better. We've seen that with the pandemic, and we have seen that, and as we talk about our housing challenges and how we can come together to advance this. So this next year, I'm looking forward to working with all of you, finding new ways to help, finding ways to bring people together to solve these issues about where people live, work, and improve the quality of life and enjoy all the amenities that we have right here in Pinellas County. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Your vision and leadership are changing how we collaborate on housing in Pinellas County. Before we move to our speakers, I'd like to remind you that we'll be taking your questions throughout today's session. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to type your questions or give a thumbs up to questions others have posted. Now we welcome a message from Jamie Ross, President and CEO of the Florida Housing Coalition. Prior to joining the Florida Housing Coalition, Jamie served as the Affordable Housing Director at 1,000 Friends of Florida, a statewide nonprofit smart growth organization. She facilitates the Sadowski Act Coalition to ensure funding for Florida's state and local housing programs. In addition, she founded the Florida Community Land Trust Institute. Nationally, Jamie serves on the boards of Grounded Solutions Network and the Innovative Housing Institute, and is a recognized expert in avoiding and overcoming the NIMBY syndrome. Jamie couldn't be with us today, but she recorded a video with her thoughts on this summit and where we go from here.
Good morning. Today's the final webinar for the virtual summit. So what happens after the conclusion of this summit? Will it have been a great educational experience? Yeah, definitely. It's been a terrifically designed and executed community engagement. It's brought the public and private sector together to speak to some of the most pressing housing challenges throughout Pinellas County, and a great many excellent ideas for overcoming those challenges. And that's great. But will that be the optimal outcome? Probably not. The optimal outcome will be government collaboration and action. Action will involve the implementation of a plan that involves the public sectors with the private sectors, nonprofits, for-profits, as well as public and private businesses throughout the county. Strategies won't look the same in each jurisdiction. There will be differences depending upon location, but all will hold a common conviction. That common conviction is that affordable housing is a community asset, and to produce and preserve this community asset takes political will. Housing that is affordable to the workforce is a vital part of a community's infrastructure. A diversity of type and tenure serving various incomes, ages, colors, cultures. That's what makes a community vibrant, an attractive place to be. This breadth of diversity is good for business. It is good for the economy. It's good for our children's upbringing. It's good for our quality of life. Pinellas County, like all desirable locations in Florida, has a deficit of housing that's affordable. But the county deserves a great deal of credit for what it has accomplished. Pinellas County was one of the first counties in the state to recognize the importance of preserving affordable housing in perpetuity. And the county received an award from the Florida Housing Coalition in 2011 for using a community land trust to preserve housing that was serving the most vulnerable populations, so that property repaired with public subsidies would continue to serve the public benefit. I know you've discussed the importance of public subsidy for financing affordable housing during this summit. And most of you are aware that local governments have not been receiving the SHIP funding they should have. Right now, Pinellas County is missing over $10 million from its SHIP program just this year. That's financial subsidy dollars that you should be able to count on every year. I wouldn't be doing my job as the facilitator of the Sadowski Coalition if I didn't take this opportunity to ask for all of you to help bring the SHIP money to Pinellas County that is statutorily dedicated to your community. The $10 million in SHIP money was appropriated for Pinellas County to be shared with Clearwater and Largo and St. Petersburg on a population basis in 2020, as I said. But the governor vetoed that appropriation because of COVID. But it wasn't swept, just vetoed, not swept. Affordable housing takes creative land use planning, regulatory reform, incentives, financing, long-term affordability assurances, and the public and private sector supporting one another, working together. The Florida Housing Coalition applauds you for what you've already done, and we're looking forward to helping you with the design and the implementation of the strategies that have been generated from this summit. That's where the rubber hits the road. So congratulations to all of you who have put this summit together and to all of you who have been participating. The Florida Housing Coalition looks forward to helping you implement all the great ideas that have been generated from this public and private sector effort.
Wow. Jamie has a great deal of expertise, and we really appreciate her thoughts. Jamie talked about what the outcome of our summit will be: government collaboration and action. She's right, that's our goal. To talk about how we get there, where the rubber hits the road, as Jamie said, I'll turn things over to Evan Johnson, the Interim Planning Division Manager for Pinellas County Housing and Community Development. Today, Evan will talk about the building blocks for a countywide housing compact and our next steps toward making this a reality. Evan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jill. As Jill mentioned, I'm going to speak a little bit about the countywide housing strategy and the framework that we've put together, as well as the elements of the housing compact, which we hope to be putting together in the coming weeks and months for discussion throughout the county. So I think it's important to start by thinking a little bit about what we've learned. I know that Jill already covered some of those items in her introduction, but I think it's important to go over them again because so many of these things that we have discussed during the summit are now being integrated into our strategy and in our discussion of the compact. So first one being that we need to rethink the way in which we talk about affordable housing and we talk about the people who need affordable housing. It needs to be, we need to get rid of that us versus them or us and them discussion. There are market and regulatory hurdles that inhibit housing developers, and that can be from a market housing developer or affordable housing. And we need to be aware of them, and we need to find tools and strategies to reduce them. There are innovative government practices, and we heard from some of those in one of our summits, creating new opportunities for investment, whether that be in general housing, again, in market rate, or whether that be affordable housing explicitly. And then finally, we talked, and Barry mentioned this in his introduction as well, we talked a little bit about the corridor planning effort, particularly the one that Forward Pinellas is looking to undertake in the coming years, that will really be looking to find ways to connect housing, affordable housing, to jobs, to educational amenities and other services in a way that means that you could live in one place in the county and get to a job elsewhere in the county in an efficient and safe manner. Which I think is really important to our long-term success. Oh,
sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see your presentation. Can you share that, please?
Oh, absolutely. Something has come up. Thank you, Jill.
No, thank you. You get to start over.
I will do that. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. How does that work?
Good. Thank you.
All right, so we'll just start with this slide right here. So discussing again what we've learned through these summits so far really are feeding into what we're talking about with the summit, the strategy, as well as the compact that we're hoping to execute in the coming months and years. So what is the big idea? Well, the big idea is first and foremost to just hit on those items that we were talking about as it relates to the corridor strategy, which is to connect and link attainable, affordable housing and homes to transportation, to jobs, to schools and education opportunities. So what types of things is that going to need to include? Well, first of all, it needs to include both public and private sector approaches. We know that the public sector cannot solve our problem. The problem is too big, it's too diverse, and we don't have enough resources to do so. So we need to make sure that we've engaged both our major employers as well as the development community in finding those solutions. It needs to have clear measures and goals moving forward and accountability. And if we don't know where we are, we're not going to know if we've made progress in accomplishing some type of goal. And I think in creating a countywide strategy, it really is essential that we are tracking what we're doing and we're talking about the progress that we're making, because it's going to be important to educating our elected officials as well as the general public. We're going to be focused on creating new affordable units, but we also want to be focused on creating new market units. And in addition to that, we need to find strategies to look at protecting existing affordable housing around the county. Most people do not live in subsidized housing. There are plenty of areas in Pinellas County where that have affordable housing available. And we need to make sure that we protect them from phenomenon like gentrification and so forth the best that we can, and understand that that's something that we are facing is a loss in addition to building new ones. And then finally, we need to talk about that connection between housing and economic development. It's essential that not only do we provide housing for people who have jobs now, but that as target industries are looking for places to relocate and join our Pinellas County community, that they understand that we have a comprehensive strategy to address where their employees are going to live. Nobody wants to put a major facility in a county if they're not going to be able to have their employees housed nearby. So making that connection is going to be really important to our long-term success. So we had some discussions at the end of last year to talk about coming up with some consensus items around our strengths and our opportunities. From a strengths perspective, you know, our leaders are committed and they're very passionate, whether that be the elected officials, our administrations. We have strong support and a lot of cohesion between what we're trying to accomplish in our vision for affordable housing. We have financial resources and staff expertise. Of course, we don't have enough financial resources, but we do have some, and as evidenced by the Board of County Commissioners setting aside $80 million of Penny 4 dollars for our Penny 4 affordable housing program, which will be running for the next 10 years. And we also have existing intergovernmental coordination. So we have a tradition, a history, a structure that we have used working together through Forward Pinellas on a countywide land use and transportation basis. And this means that we don't have to create something from scratch. We can build off the things that we know are already working. And then finally, opportunities, we'll touch on that. History of collaboration, always important. I think our relationships between the county and the municipalities is much stronger than it has been in a while, certainly. And we feel very comfortable and confident that that's going to yield good benefits with our program. We've got a good residential market. Ultimately, it's really hard to get affordable housing units built if there's not any activity in the market. So we have private development money coming in. We need to really engage with that community to find ways to create affordable units. And then finally, we see an opportunity in joint communication. Again, that message, making sure we're delivering it consistently across the entire county. So that strategy is going to include policy pieces from the countywide plan and Advantage Pinellas transportation plan, regulations and incentives at the local level, strategies for preservation and protection, as well as production, as I mentioned with the Penny 4 program. So that really is a overall overarching strategy that we want to focus on each individual parts of over the coming years. So where does the countywide housing compact fit into all of this? Well, the idea is this is kind of the first essential step in the executing the strategy. So this is our way of getting everybody on the same page so that as we move forward, we're all agreeing to do same things and working together. So compacts exist in many different forms and shapes and sizes. They're very common when it comes to regional intergovernmental coordination. So whether it's the Mile High Compact, which has been around for decades, dealing with land use, transportation for Denver. Housing Metro Boston is a more recent example of a housing specific compact. I believe it was 15 local governments signed on to address their housing issue, addressing many of the same concerns that we have in our community. The Resiliency Coalition from Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council has taken the lead on that. I believe we're up to 29 local governments from the region who have signed on to this to work and to collaborate on finding solutions for resiliency. And then finally, one recent example that's more localized is the Gateway Master Plan Memorandum of Understanding, where the county, Forward Pinellas, and some of our city partners signed on to do joint planning in the Gateway area and make sure that we're all holding each other accountable moving forward. So our working vision statement for a countywide compact really touches on all those things we've already talked about. It's about finding a common and coordinated approach to increase and protect housing that is accessible to jobs, that is accessible to educational opportunities for our workforce. So what are the pieces of that's going to go into a compact? Well, ultimately, we've got to state our shared goals and values. So we need to make sure that we have a collective set of goals that we've all agreed to. And then we have to take a commitment. We have to make a commitment in the compact to take some type of action towards accomplishing those goals. So we've agreed to the goals. Now, what are we agreeing to do in the coming years to address those goals together? And then finally, it should include a framework for how we're going to do future implementation. And this could be something along the lines of a ongoing working group or something along those lines, shared measures, things like that, to make sure that we're holding each other accountable and that we're keeping this housing compact in the forefront of our decision making. We've had several partners involved up to this point in our discussions of the strategy, as well as the discussions around the compact. In 2019, we had a workshop session where we kind of talked through challenges and opportunities in and around affordable housing and this idea of a compact. We created a staff level tactical team with members that you'll see on the right of the slide there. And we've basically been collaborating on a number of issues, including discussions around the compact and what it should include. So there are three main elements or pieces of the compact that we've developed or come up with, conceptualized at this point. First is going to be development of an action plan. And yes, this sounds like a compact to then create a plan, right? So it doesn't sound like we're doing much, but what it is very much a brief summary of commitments that we are making as a community together. We are going to be thinking collectively for once on this issue, not just as an individual municipality or the county. So we want to have a brief assessment of our strengths and our weaknesses. We want to identify goals. What are our targets countywide as far as production as well as protection of affordable housing? Where are all the affordable housing developments and communities? Where does it exist now? Is any of it under threat? Those types of things need to be in a countywide action plan. Goals and strategies for the short, mid, and long term, and then a commitment to developing the data sharing and performance measures. So the county has committed to kind of acting as a repository moving forward with data related to affordable housing countywide. And we hope through the action plan, we'll be developing a series of measures again to make sure that we have accountability moving forward. Joint marketing and outreach. We currently have a web presence. It's where you find information about the summit. It's where you find information about our Penny for Affordable Housing program. That will be evolving over time to become more of a county-wide portal for all of our partners in the compact. We also are looking to address and have ongoing educational activities. So this summit series has been 5 summits so far, and I promise we're going to take a little break before we have new ones. But we do like the idea of having an occasional webinar series focused to different audiences that need to learn more about how we provide affordable housing and those types of issues. So whether it's residents or whether it's developers or local officials, we want to have webinar trainings out there so people can really start to understand what the housing market is like and how it works in Pinellas County. And then finally, the third piece is development of a regulatory toolkit. Now we understand that everybody has different ways of implementing their regulations, and it's going to look different in every single jurisdiction across the county. We do this now with our comprehensive plans. We do this now with our land development code. But what we want is to start to speak a common regulatory language in and around affordable housing. And what we want to accomplish with that toolkit is we want to increase flexibility. We want to encourage mixed income development. If there are process improvements and strategies that can be done to improve review processes in and around affordable housing, we want to do that. Anything we can do to reduce development costs. You know, we cannot control the cost of land, but we certainly can talk and have discussions in and around fees. We can talk about possibly, infrastructure improvements and things like that that can be available out there. And we really want to look at innovative design standards. And what that means is you've heard throughout this summit series, we had one very focused on missing middle housing. It is going to take housing, all types of housing, to make a dent in our current challenge and our current problem. And so it's going to take single family homes, it's going to take duplexes, it's going to take that missing middle, small multifamily development, as well as larger scale urban developments as well. So we really want to make sure that we have flexibility in our design standards to allow a diversity of housing types throughout the county. As far as what's next in the process of developing a compact, hopefully for public signature, well, first and foremost, we've got to finish a public draft of the compact. So something that we want to then share with the community, and we can start having more frequent conversations in and around what's in it and what we're trying to accomplish. Once that's out, we look to engage with not only our own Board of County Commissioners and our administration, stakeholders, et cetera, but we want to talk to the other cities. You all are going to need to be a part of this collective solution. And we know that we need to do outreach and education on the compact and again, what we're trying to accomplish. The executing of the compact, once we have that critical mass of partners ready to move forward, and then that group of partners will move forward with this countywide action plan, which hopefully will end in really having where the rubber hits the road. So with that, that's my introduction to the compact and the housing strategy. I look forward to taking your questions later in our discussion. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Evan. I'd also like to thank members of the Housing Tactical Team who have put a lot of effort into getting us to this point. I'm really excited about the progress we've made and look forward to being among the many champions for this effort. And I'm not alone. We asked a few of our other partners to share their thoughts, and here's what they said.
I think so many people are affected by the high cost of housing in our community. And I think anybody, when they think about it, has a personal story to share.
I have encountered an issue with affordable housing through really my daughter, who graduated from college with a bachelor's degree and struggled once she found a job with finding an apartment that she could afford to rent. So she lived with us for quite some time. And then ultimately, through word of mouth, she was able to find a garage apartment, which we all call an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU.
I immediately consider a number of groups that can be impacted by housing affordability, such as low-wage workers, single mother-led households, and our elderly groups, retired groups. But at the moment, the most striking group to me would be young Black boys. And that's because I consider those adverse childhood experiences that young Black boys are at risk to when they're living in poor quality housing or in housing instability situations.
This is a human rights issue. This is a dignity issue. It's a quality of life issue, and it affects all of us. Affordable housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, it's all really important to a diverse and incredibly vibrant St. Petersburg.
We as communities not only have the obligation to plan for housing for all residents, but we have the opportunity to change the trajectory for the next generation.
I think we're at a pivotal moment in Pinellas County where we really have an opportunity as we continue to grow in a different way and to provide housing in strategic locations, housing that's accessible and affordable to all segments of our community.
Because this is such a challenging issue and because there's such little vacant land that we can work with, there has to be a countywide solution. Clearwater can't do it alone. St. Petersburg can't do it alone. Tarpon Springs can't. So we all need to come together, kind of level the playing field, if you will, throughout the county in terms of the regulatory environment. And I think that will really help us address the problem.
The actions we take today build strong families and strong neighborhoods for tomorrow.
I think it's absolutely time that local governments must come together and really face this challenge.
Affordable housing is not a one solution problem. It's going to take a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of creative ideas, and it's going to take a lot of people at the table. And so just start having the conversations, start building coalitions of other like-minded people within the community. There are so many great things happening across the county to tackle this problem.
I think we all understand the stakes when it comes to having affordable homes for everyone, from enhancing our residents' quality of life to ensuring a strong workforce that can live and work in Pinellas, and even building our tourism and jobs economy. All of us depend on the people who need affordable homes the most, and our communities depend on one another to build a coalition to tackle these issues together. We have a wonderful panel lined up to discuss some challenges that come with creating a compact, as well as ways that local governments and the private and nonprofit sectors can provide opportunities for success. These panelists will provide us with ideas on how to navigate and build public-private partnerships, gain nonprofit support, and keep this conversation going throughout our community. First, we have CJ Reynolds. CJ is the Director of Resiliency and Engagement with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. She has 3 decades of experience convening industry, nonprofits, agencies, local governments, and academia to analyze emerging public health and climate risks, define data needs, and develop partnerships to create innovative programs and policy change. Thanks for being with us today, CJ. Please take a quick minute to comment on housing and resiliency.
Good, thank you. Kudos to putting this important idea forward. The Resilient Coalition was formed in 2018, really under the guidance and leadership of Pinellas County Commissioner Janet Long when she was the chair of the council that year. It took some months as we worked through our membership with our leadership from Sean Sullivan to get each of the counties as well as the other cities to go through their process for reviewing, approving, voting, and adopting the coalition, which we refer to as the MOU. So we're up to 31 members now, and we're doing amazing work and attracting money and attention from foundations to continue on the work, which specifically relating to resilience and affordable housing.
Thank you, CJ. Next on our panel is Ben Toro-Spears. Ben is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Florida Housing Coalition, with a background in affordable housing and community development, real estate finance, and strategic planning. Ben works with the Florida Housing Coalition's partners on implementation of fair housing action plans, local government housing affordability frameworks, and nonprofit strategic plans. Previously, Ben worked for Enterprise Community Partners, a national nonprofit for affordable housing and community development. Hi, Ben, thanks for joining us. Please take a minute to comment on how you believe coalitions can advance housing affordability.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I will say that montage there at the end got me pretty darn excited. So I am ready to go to talk about this. Coalitions are incredibly important when it comes to affordable housing and making sure that we have a sufficient supply of affordable housing. We, as advocates for this issue, face a structural challenge, and that is support for affordable housing is incredibly diffuse. It is spread across hundreds of thousands of households in every community in the state of Florida. The power and the advocacy is spread so thin that it can be difficult to really move in one direction. So a coalition, if it is structured correctly, can bring together the broad cross spectrum of stakeholders that truly do have a hand in affordable housing. And if you bring that together and you start moving in a single direction, we really can make a big difference. So again, I'm excited to talk today, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Ben. Now I'd like to introduce Julie Rocco. Julie is the Senior Community Engagement Advocate for the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg. Julie describes her work as a balance of community engagement and challenging the traditional status quo. Julie's service to the community also includes membership on the Homeless Funders Council and the Pinellas County Health and Human Services Grant Review Committee. Welcome, Julie. Could you please talk a minute about the importance of housing equity for Pinellas?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting the foundation to participate in this important work on behalf of our community. When we think about housing equity, we think about it as a cornerstone of the social and the economic and environmental well-being of our individuals, as our families, and as our community. One of the things that we really think about when we talk about affordable housing is individuals and families and neighborhoods create the vibrancy and the social fabric and the economic viability and the environmental safety nets that promote ongoing well-being and the ability to reach our full potential at the micro level and the macro level in our communities. So we're really excited to have this discussion today. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and to the other panelists. Evan Johnson's going to join you now as we begin our question and answer period for today. As a reminder to our audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please type them in the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can also give a thumbs up to questions that other people have asked. Time permitting, if anyone raises their hand in Zoom, we'll unmute you to speak. If you are on a phone, hit *9 to raise your hand. While our audience is entering questions, I'll get the conversation started. Now that you've seen Evan's presentation on the Draft Housing Compact, what advice would each of you offer as the most important thing we should ensure our compact includes or addresses? And Julie, we'll have you start.
The compact should address a health and equity in all policies framework. It should address a home. People don't look for housing, they look for a home. They look beyond the brick and mortar of a community and the ability to, what's the heartbeat of a community? It should address the ability for somebody to choose the neighborhood they want to live in, and the opportunity for it to be affordable, accessible, available, and adequate to promote optimal well-being.
Thank you, Julie. CJ, what would you say is the most important thing?
Well, it has to recognize the future risks from potential extreme weather. I mean, I know you guys had a huge impact. Various communities were impacted by Tropical Storm Eta. So that just shows us, and that was just a tropical storm. So I think it has to figure out how it works effectively with critical infrastructure, emergency management. I think those are key things. I would say also a topic of discussion regarding resiliency and housing affordability needs to come out on mobile homes, because they provide enormous affordability for a lot of people. They're not all bad, right? And so we can't just throw everything away. So there needs to be a serious assessment process of what do we do about and how do we strengthen, what's our capacity associated with that. And that actually, I first heard that idea come from Mayor Brown from the city of Largo last year as a part of our conversations with this. So there's a lot of movement to study those things like that.
It's a great point, CJ. Thank you so much. Ben, what would you say is one of the single most important things that we make sure we address?
One of the single most important things in my mind is communications. And I really do appreciate the mention of that early on. A communication strategy is essential here, and it's going to get a little bit complicated. The Florida Housing Coalition has seen these sort of regional efforts founder on the shoals of poor communication strategy. This happens on a somewhat frequent basis. And it's going to really depend on the needs of the individual members of the compact. Everyone needs to see themselves represented in that communication strategy, whether it is influential individuals who are involved in the particular executive committees, or whether it's broader social service agencies, stakeholders that really need to have their voice. The communications you can't underplay how important that effort is. And one last point on that communications front, the Florida Housing Coalition is particularly excited about this effort because House Speaker Chris Sprowls his district is in northern Pinellas. It is essential that an effort like this be seen as a success for affordable housing. It is essential that Speaker Sprowls hear that the local governments are all moving in a single direction. That kind of messaging and communications would reap benefits. And it's not just sort of undefined benefits. It is truly dollars and cents. Right now, and this is an unofficial estimate, but the estimate is that the Florida legislature is sitting on approximately $600 million in affordable housing funding across 2 years that have yet to be appropriated. And House Speaker Sprowls absolutely is an important member in the decision-making framework for apportioning those funds. So this is a very important effort, and I don't want to put too much pressure on you folks, but there are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake here. I'll put it that way.
Thank you, Ben. Well said. So this question is for Julie. Your organization is focused on addressing racial disparities in health throughout Pinellas County. how can we work to correct past racial disparities in housing to ensure that we take a more equitable and inclusive approach as we move forward?
Thank you for that question. I'd say the biggest thing, as Ben just mentioned around communication, communicate that is our intention, and then move actions to mitigate those disparities. When we think about how those racial disparities came about with redlining, begin to make data-informed decisions around the redlining that we created. Tropicana Field will become a big issue upcoming in St. Pete. And how do we mitigate and remedy some of the disparities that occurred in housing opportunities for homes and neighborhoods? When we start to look at code enforcement and the nuances that creates from a racial disparities perspective, the ability to inherit a home if there are too many liens on a home due to code enforcement. So there are a lot of different housing codes and inspection codes that we can look at and challenge. I think that's the other aspect of how do you correct past racial disparities? You begin to challenge and dismantle the system that helped put them in place. And we would do this in partnership with residents, with individuals that are bearing the brunt of these burdens, and figure out pathways to create more equitable opportunities to capital, to loans, to unique strategies. And then also looking at the different tentacles of the dimensions of housing, whether it's workforce, transit, land use, and the contiguous opportunities that would create as well.
So as a tack-on question, Evan, how would you say that our land use and our land development code regulations and land use categories can be a tool to help us address some of the past issues that were born out of racial disparity?
Well, I mean, I think one of the key ways that we can start to address, equity more broadly, which of course includes, economic and racial disparity, from a regulatory, code comp plan perspective, is I think first you need to build the policy structure in your comp plan that we are supportive of strengthening and encouraging these types of existing communities, as well as integrating and creating mixed-use communities. I mean, I think one of the ways that we can probably be most effective is by ensuring that as we move forward with affordable housing developments or affordable housing located in market rate developments, that we ensure that we're creating mixed income, mixed use communities throughout the county, and that we're not simply locating affordable housing neighborhoods in places that have long been affordable, but that we're really trying to integrate across the entire county, because everybody works all over. Like, it's we are needing to get across the county. We live all over in different cities across the county. So I think one of the ways that you can do it from a code perspective to start is to look at how do we encourage multifamily, how do we encourage mixed income communities to develop over time, so that we start to get more of a scattered approach to where we're providing new housing for these communities.
That's great. That's great. This next question, I'm going to ask Ben to weigh in response. What do you say to local governments who don't see a role that they have in affordable housing? I mean, how do we make the case that everyone should have a role in affordable housing? You talked about communication, but we in Pinellas County have 24 municipalities. And I think it's fair to say that, some of us aren't all on the same collective perspective here in terms of our communities and our commitment.
It's a great question. So at a real basic level, there is a legal argument to be made here. According to Florida statute, Chapter 163, Part 2, local governments must meet the housing demands of current and expected residents in their community. And that is part of the comprehensive planning process. That is a law that is inconsistently applied across jurisdictions. It is difficult to estimate future demand, but that is on the books right now. In addition, in terms of surplus lands, if a local government holds title to certain pieces of property, they need to be listing those lands and make them available for affordable housing development if they are suitable for that development. Again, that is a law that is inconsistently applied and followed. So I would say that Pinellas County and all of its jurisdictions can really set an example for coming together and working together and making sure that they are, at a minimum, following the law in Florida. But outside of, you know, that kind of legal argument, which is absolutely legitimate, there are arguments to be made that this is about economic vitality. This is about the long-term sustainability of our neighborhoods, block by block, household by household. We spoke, we very briefly glanced over this issue of equity. I think it is an enormous looming issue that every single government, local government in the state of Florida needs to be addressing right now. We have arrived at an inequitable position because of countless individual small-scale decisions that have been made over decades of time. And all of that results in an inequitable environment that is essentially undermining the vitality of our communities. So again, this is about making sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. And we can make that happen. It is simply a matter of working together, addressing some of the initial steps that I saw Evan outline in your housing compact, streamlining the regulatory environment is one step. It's not entirely clear to me to what degree a broader spectrum of stakeholders are going to be involved in this. That's a further conversation. But I would hope that local residents get involved in it because this can truly be a movement that can sustain itself through good economic headwinds, bad economic headwinds, right? If that coalition is brought together in a way that is representative of the many stakeholders that have a piece in this. So again, economic vitality, bringing in the business community who obviously need their workforce to be showing up on time. Shift workers really have a difficult time showing up to their job if they have to hop across 3 different bus lines to get there. If they're worrying about the minute when they wake up in the morning, they're worried about meeting their rent or their mortgage payments. Those workers need and benefit from housing security in their life. So this is, I would make those arguments to a local government.
That's great, Ben. So we've really talked about, and we're casting our compact as more of a carrot and an appeal to how affordable housing is an everybody issue and so important to us, regardless of which city or community we live in here in Pinellas. But I'd like to ask this question, I think first to CJ, and then if Ben or Julie or Evan have anything to tack on. But what if it weren't a carrot? Do you see any benefit in assigning a housing needs allocation number where local governments would be required to hit certain targets in order to receive, the state funding, for example?
Ooh, that's a questions of sticks make people nervous, but I think it's a worthy discussion that needs to be considered in terms of trade-offs. Right. So often we just say, here's a stick, but what are the other benefits? I mean, collectively, when you talked about communications, how we look at fees, the use of taxes, what do the citizens consider as fair? Right. And so there's different aspects of what kind of programs can you access and put together. I think we need to recognize that if we don't build these things, there are costs, there are hidden costs. And there are problems that are associated with that. So while, I worked in private sector for 20 years before I went to the university and in the Regional Planning Council, there's always going to be the profit goal and the margin. But however, the governments can better incentivize and create consistent standards that make sure that the market all moves to the same thing, right? And where we have inconsistent policies from one city to the next or one state to the next, this is where the profit and the for-profit side says, it's cheaper over here. I'm going to go over here and build. And we have the race to the bottom, and then we have stuff that's not resilient, or it isn't built right, or whatever. So really looking at your building standards, and let's all agree on what is resilient redesign for a mixed use space look like? What does that entail in terms of the infrastructure support that local governments will have to provide? Because if you build things badly and we've got concrete everywhere, we've got additional cost. We as the taxpayers, right? And so the citizens will have more costs. You'll be disrupted from going to work. So I think we don't talk often enough about the economic trade-offs, pros and cons, and that's a common thing. And industry, in my experience, has been willing to collaborate on partnerships when there's the opportunity for innovating and growing market share. So if we can figure out what that looks like, put people together who have brilliant, new, affordable, equitable, healthy housing designs, who maybe aren't already in the development sector, bringing in new ideas, new talent, maybe it's growing it up from the bottom. So that doesn't really answer your question about sticks, but it's my perspective of how you keep the pressure on consistency of standards and design, but yet offer more incentive for real innovation that really answers these questions. You know, the country can do anything. I mean, we've proven that, you know, there's lots of opportunities for technology and innovation. We just have to apply it to housing like we've never done before.
Great, thank you, CJ. Ben, do you have anything you'd like to add, or Evan?
Oh, I was just going to add, you know, I think that allocations at the local level, at least the way I see how we've been doing things in Florida and in the region, personally, I think they're problematic. I think what we really want to be doing right now in Pinellas County is we want to be building a foundation to move forward. And I think the way that we do that is really talk about a collaborative partnership and really talk about building the case. I mean, I think education is not, our responsibility is not just to educate other elected officials, or it's to educate the general public as to the importance of providing this housing and playing partner in these efforts. I think people throughout the county, once the case is made, will understand how their well-being, much like Dr. T said in the intro video, their well-being, their long-term economic, financial well-being depends on us being successful with diversifying the housing stock, with attracting jobs, with providing healthy, safe places for people to be, in a good education system. So we need to make that case, and we need to speak, people need to speak of affordable housing like they speak of the importance of a good education. And I think we can get there without necessarily a stick. We can get there by creating incentives, and we're going to have to get creative with incentives. And I don't think, we don't know what those will be yet, but I think that they could be regulatory, they could be financial and otherwise. And so I think we can make a lot of progress and maybe have a conversation later about allocations, you know, years from now when we've actually seen what we can do together.
That's great. Thank you, Evan. Good add-on. So this question has several thumbs up. So I'm going to allow Julie and Ben an opportunity to weigh in response. The question is, can you provide an example of an effective countywide or regional housing compact in Florida or outside of Florida? Ben, why don't you take a stab at that one?
Sure, an effective one. There are many. This is not a particularly unique idea, of course. The devil is in the details, and the devil is in implementation, to be frank. So successful efforts, I would say, is in the Orlando metropolitan area. There was a multi-county effort there recently that wrapped up in 2019. What came out of that was an action plan that identified benchmarks and targets and a list of strategies that the regional group would work on collectively. And one of an example of the success that came out of that was the structure of the effort. They had subcommittees focused on particular subject matter areas, one of which was permanent affordability and community land trusts. And what came out of that subcommittee was the recommendation that the Orlando region really did need a high capacity community land trust. And they're pursuing that and scaling that up actively in target communities. So that is an example. There are other examples happening right now. Lake County and its various municipalities is engaged in a similar effort. Broward County, the same thing. But again, the devil is in the details. A lot of this, there is initial early momentum, and then really due to a range of factors, sometimes these efforts can essentially fade away and no real impact is made. So I'm wishing the best for this compact.
Thanks, Ben. I think we all are. Julie, do you have anything to add by way of a good model for our compact?
No, but I would like to circle back to the carrot and the stick, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I think a good model, the underpinnings are in certain philosophical and moral prerogatives in what a housing compact that it would be successful for our community could look like. So when we start to think about the carrot and the stick, start to think and reflect on who currently is kind of getting the stick, or who currently bears the burden of and the sacrifice of the lack of accountability when our community doesn't step up and move towards the creation of a housing compact that creates consistency and continuity with an agreed upon philosophy of housing. Potentially, we would suggest housing as a right. That what are the dimensions that are necessary in order to move that forward, and the systems of accountability, whether it's a carrot or a stick, that needs to shift and move these systems that are maneuvering families right now in our community in a way that there isn't equitable access to a home. So I think that it's a matter of somebody's, who can share this solution from either an incentive perspective or a targeted perspective. I do think that having a GPS loaded with the path that can be agreed upon is a good idea with targeted opportunities. It gives us an opportunity to agree on potential solutions to get there, the shared outcome, a shared vision for our community.
Yeah, I think that's great, Julie. You also pull us back to that being an overarching goal of our compact idea, right? That we want it to be aspirational, but we also want it to be practical in terms of where we can go. I think, Ben, did Ben want to add something?
Yeah, I appreciate, and Julie, I appreciate your holding our collective feet to the fire. That is important. In terms of, sticks, when it comes to funding, a lot of at least at the state level, that funding is apportioned according to statute. So there's really not a whole lot of, I can't necessarily see a structure coming out of this compact that would adjust, disbursement of funding. But that being said, I think that there might be room for setting meaningful targets in terms of administration of funds, administration of variance reviews, discretionary approvals, that kind of zoning approach. The faster that an affordable home can get from concept to shovel in the ground, the better. That helps the affordable housing environment. So perhaps the municipalities and the county could commit themselves to certain turnaround targets in the administration of funds and the review process. Things like that would certainly help, and it is within the purview of these local governments who are certainly going to be a part of this.
Thanks, Ben. I think CJ had something to add on.
Yeah, it's part of some things that we've learned from the Resilience Coalition over it's almost 2 years now. And I came on board after it was started. And so the goals in getting something started making sure that, from the coordinator's role, that each of the members has clearly articulated what they want out of it, what they think their own local goals are, and then separating those things into different kinds of bins where common commitments can be collaborative. So working across a sort of continuum of housing topics and issues. Not everybody has to adopt every last, line item in a compact to be a member. You should be a member because it's going to benefit you. The benefits that our local governments, or many of the same in terms of the housing compact, we've had an increased attention on sharing of technical knowledge and information. So where one barrier island community learns something, their engineer is now a part of a larger group who can share that perspective of what's working, what's not working. And consequently, we talk about raising the goals and the bar. So instead of looking at old ways of doing assessments, we're now really leading the charge, and different counties, different cities deciding to go for higher levels of standards, and others working their way up, right? Because it takes a process to change the knowledge, change the culture, understand our perspectives. And so everyone does it a little bit differently, but overall, you're increasing resilience, or overall, you're growing the total number of housing that's appropriate for folks at the right levels of income. I think we have a big blind spot to income in terms of what is real in the community. I've learned a lot from our partner United Way Suncoast about that. I was always like, what's AMI? What do you mean by AMI? And the percent and the gaps. And so things that get built that are really designed for very, very, successful jobs, whereas a lot of our jobs are tourism based. Tourism is our #1 leading employer industry in the region. So we have to take stock. And that's the thing that's hard for everybody to say individually. But when we get together as a group, we can acknowledge some of the big challenges that we all face together, and recognizing that it's good to lock arms and say, hey, we've got to change the way we're doing these things, how we do it, what it takes to get it done. But the benefits of it is that, if we didn't have the coalition, and if we hadn't started talking to a variety of counties and dealing with the peril of flood, which we also looked at impacts to CRAs in peril of flood. And that's an important thing. Where are we investing the money? But because of that initiative, then the JP Morgan Chase Foundation gave us $500,000 to create this regional resilience assessment for communities and energy. And we kept the coalition perspective going. So the members that are already a part of the coalition are now part of this REACH project. And we're continuing to crosstalk that. And now, thanks to a lot of work that Julie's foundation has supported, integrating equity and health policies into resilient, affordable housing. So we're really ramping up from the work that has been done in Pinellas County, work that other cities are doing, Largo, Clearwater, a lot of staff sharing information. And so that's the value of it, figuring out the critical issues that are so painful to you individually, but then figuring out how to, it's like going to boot camp together, right? You can all do this work, it's painful, but if we do it together, somehow it gets done better and faster, and we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. That's my 2 cents on it. So I think you guys are off on a fantastic path already to getting this done. And the one last thing on the coalition is really engaging the private sector. We have 90 stakeholder partners that range from the universities to the chambers and the business things. We haven't started effectively really going into what are their perspectives on resilience. So housing is a lot more clear cut on some levels. So you probably have a better way of doing that, but you have a continuum of partners in private sector to nonprofits that need to weigh in. And that's our next step, is to better engage both community voices and the business community writ large to say, what do you think resilience means? And figure out how that fits into the regional plan. So thanks for letting me share these perspectives.
Oh, thank you, CJ. There was actually a question in the queue that was going to ask you about the lessons learned. So you've answered several. It's great. So thank you so much. Glad you saw that. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit. So the question relates to mixed income multifamily projects and what the panelists think about the likelihood that we can incorporate affordable units into market rate, or some market rate units into affordable development, and what kind of specific tools does it take to get this done? So Evan, why don't you weigh in first?
There we go. Sure. I think that You know, I think that the question was focused on what do we think is a better approach or a more feasible approach, whether it be, you know, a small number of market rate units in an affordable housing development unit development or vice versa. And I can't speak to, I'm not quite as directly engaged, and maybe Ben can speak a little bit to with the affordable housing, you know, funding process. But what I do know of it is the fact that it's very complex. And ultimately, an affordable housing developer who comes usually does, there's oftentimes will bring in a mixed project where there's some level of affordable units, which is required by our funding mechanisms, but have a market component as well. I think where we really, but that's a complex process, and that's something that really involves us. I think where we have I like to think, and going back to my presentation, thinking about, we have a fairly robust multifamily residential industry right now in Pinellas County. I think there's a big opportunity there for us without significant amounts of funding, potentially being able to incent developers, market rate developers to have set asides within developments that are being built or planned that are really depending on mostly private sector funding or market funding. So I think there is a big opportunity there. I can't really speak to which one would be easier, and maybe others on the panel could, but I can say that I do think we have an opportunity that we haven't traditionally taken enough advantage of in Pinellas County. There are some examples. I think Largo's got several recent developments where they've integrated workforce housing that are really market rate developments, but there's not a lot of them. And so I think that that's still an untapped market for us.
Great. Ben, what would you add to that particular question and answer?
So in terms of mixed income housing, you can really get into the weeds on particular funding sources. I know that on a previous episode of this webinar series, we heard from, I want to say Sean Wilson at Blue Sky, say essentially the math just does not work when we're talking about tax credits coming from the state Florida Housing Finance Corporation in terms of mixed income development. And that's true. I mean, that's just a reality. So you need to look for other creative sources. I think when we're looking at local governments, which is truly what this cooperative is about, is incentivizing and encouraging private developers to include market rate or affordable units, workforce housing units within their product. And that's going to happen through density bonuses. I heard that coming from you, Evan, already as a focus area, and that's great. You want to ease the burden for those private developers to include those units. You can absolutely make the economics pencil out for those developments. So on that front, to me, it's less about affordable housing subsidy sources, and it's more about designing the regulatory environment to encourage inclusion of workforce housing units in those mixed income projects. And there's one last note on that front. Pinellas County, the phrase built out is thrown around a lot. It's not necessarily built out, it's just underbuilt. You can go vertical a lot more. You can start building on parking lots a lot more. And in the case where local governments are allowing that kind of innovative infill development and increase in intensity of the built environment, that is an opportunity that the local government has to seize to ask that developer, okay, we are giving you value in our regulatory environment on that parcel. We, the local government, in exchange for that, are asking you to increase the density to add workforce housing units in those developments. So that is the kind of approach that I hope is adopted through this compact across the county. And you can see if it works out and the innovation starts happening organically within the development community on parcels big and small in the county, you're going to see units coming out of that. And that to me is really exciting. and worth following up on and communicating the success of that to all the stakeholders involved.
Very good. Thank you. Julie, do you or CJ have anything to add as a response to the question?
I would add that I think the housing compact could also help drive solution towards this, and the fact that if a developer is going to look at mixed use, mixed market housing in one municipality, then has to figure out a new a new financial budget to make it pencil in another municipality, and they're not able to begin to prototype this financial model that can be successful across the entirety of the various municipalities in our community in the county, it makes it challenging for the developer to have to continue to figure out, what does this system take? What does this regulational system take? What are these requirements? And if we can have that consistency and continuity of agreement, the developers begin to have an understanding of how it can work and how we can collectively begin to look at the nuances when it doesn't pencil. What are some of the gap financing opportunities where there are some philanthropy discretionary dollars that can help fill some of those gaps?
That's an excellent point, Julie. Thank you so much. CJ, did you have anything to throw in there? It's okay if you don't. I have another question for you.
I do think on the new development piece of it, we've got to look also more strongly at the sustainability components. So whatever you build, it must not cost a lot to live in it. And so when we talk about innovative design and energy efficiency, particularly, I just saw some data that said something about, at a certain AMI, people are spending anywhere between 13 and 19% on their energy bills. It's going to get hotter as the climate and weather continues to change. So over the 20 to 30 years, Randy DeShazo in our office is doing a report on the future and extreme impacts of heat in the region. So if we know that it's not going to get cooler here, it will be hotter. We need to think about how our housing and the buildings and the support buildings around it and the concrete around it either exacerbate the extreme heat component or can augment it or offset it, and so that it's not a burden. And we don't, just make everything hotter. When we build higher, we add more concrete, but we still need to figure out how to keep it cool as well.
So CJ, on that point, so how do we balance resiliency and affordability? Can you just weigh in on that briefly?
Yeah, I've been talking to some people who are doing some interesting work on that, and particularly Hillsborough Habitat for Humanity is one thing where they're looking at changing how they're building what was basically, slab on grade homes in certain areas and elevating them. So your first floor, as you see from your storm surge, basically the entire Pinellas County, with the exception of the Lealman area, is a coastal high hazard area. So we can expect storm surge. So how do we innovate what we do with that first floor in terms of parking or non-space? That's going to keep your prices down from the damages. You have to go up, right? We have to go up. I think that resiliency, it's not just looking at stick-built homes. It's got to take into account wind factors. And we look at, particularly with rental units, the people who rent are a very vulnerable set of populations of folks. And so how are those buildings being managed to ensure that they stay in place during these big storms, making sure that they have the codes are there, but anyway, I'm not an engineer, so don't let me get off into these tangents, but I think it's possible, and how we strategize it. And maybe you guys need an X Prize on resilient energy efficiency design, and that's what the pod of a Pinellas goes for. And you really start to create a culture of really cool buildings, cool in the sense of heat and climate and energy and resilient way, that people want to come and live in, right? And not ugly things. I'm not saying anyone has ugly now, but I think that's the idea is, success, building what Ben was saying, what Julie was saying, what you all are trying to do. It's really about making it fun, exciting, successful, and attracting people as we to live in the places and the communities you want to specifically get them to live in, right?
That's great, CJ. So we have a couple of questions today, and I'm going to let Evan take the start with this response. But what do we do about mobile homes? We have, significant populations that are in these types of homes. It's a very affordable and a preferred opportunity for so many of our residents here in Pinellas. But what do we do about the fact that they may be unsafe in storms, or they may be located in low-lying areas that are going to be a challenge for allowing them to be replaced as they continue to age out? So Evan, why don't you start us off with that one?
Just a small question there, Jill. I mean, keeping it easy.
I thought you had the solutions. I know
Well,
you're working on it.
I think that, I want to say it was something on the order of, it's 40,000 plus manufactured home units in Pinellas County. And that may actually be a little low. And they all range in condition and population and type. And so I really think you have multiple strategies depending on what we're dealing with. I think you have quality mobile home developments with stable populations that are serving a retirement community, or snowbirds, or those types of populations that may be not in great locations when it comes to the issues of sea level rise and storm impacts, right? So there are strategies for them. But I also think we have a significant amount of mobile home parks that have not been well maintained, that have poor utilities, that have flooding issues, and that have all these other things, where you have a population that is low income, is transient. And so I think we need to find other ways to address those. So starting from, policies that we've at least considered or talked a little bit about is, how do we encourage, first it's how do we encourage mobile home park owners to either through incentives or requirements to make improvements to their parks as it relates to infrastructure, particularly. Are there ways to do it? I know that the county is currently in the process of studying infrastructure as it relates to certain mobile home parks to understand, are there issues with, waste and things like that can then give us a reason to identify solutions that maybe we can help incentivize making those improvements. Because you read articles in the paper about parks that have water issues, you hear about utility issues and those types of things that are just basic life safety type improvements that we can play a role in. I also think we need to find creative ways to encourage redevelopment, and that redevelopment can be in the form of some type of replacement strategy that would include, upgrades and improvements along the way using modern units. That could be part of the strategy. But also there are a lot of mobile home parks, manufactured home parks that are located on some of these key corridors. And so if we're having long-term conversations about corridor redevelopment, we need to engage those owners, and we need to have conversations about how do we get redevelopment to occur in a thoughtful way that will continue to provide affordable housing in those locations. And so I think those are kind of from the planning perspective, and maybe CJ can speak a little bit more to the resiliency perspective specifically.
CJ?
Yeah, thank you. I think there have been vast improvements in mobile home structures for the ones that would be put down today versus the things that may be, leftovers from the 50s and 60s and 70s in certain areas. I live in Hillsborough, and I see, the same thing. We go around. So you have to have a multi-level strategy for the resilience pieces of it, because what the risks to different parcels, should drive what the potential redevelopment physical opportunity is and how you redevelop that area. And maybe it's something we just really need to do a better job of. I know that it's very important because the numbers, I've often heard that numbers don't work out when you just say, okay, we've got, 800 people living in here and they're paying $500 a month. And it's, very challenging to build a brand new building and get the density and create it so that they can rent it at that same level of price. So I think mobile homes can still play a solution. It's how we tie them down or how we elevate them, or those things, again, you need engineers for. But I think that exploring the site-specific resilient strategies and needs and looking at it fixed to your corridor, I think those are, the complex collaborations between your public works, your resilience team, the private sector, and that, it's a evolving, it's an evolving problem, but evolving, we're not going to solve this overnight, right? So your coalition has multi-year goals, right? It's the long game we're trying to work on here. So
that's exactly right, CJ. Our time is starting to run a little short. We don't have any hands raised, but I want to circle back to Julie and Ben on one last question that is a bit of a combo, really, of some things we keep hearing over the course of this series. And we know it's a continuing challenge, but there was a question that came through today about how can churches and other nonprofits participate and help us. But the question for Julie and Ben: local governments often make decisions based on the loudest NIMBY voices, and I can't imagine anyone in the audience doesn't know, but that's not in my backyard voices. And we heard in an earlier session of our series about YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard. So I just want to take, in time remaining, we've got about maybe 30 seconds for each of you to wrap up sort of your thoughts about how do we engage these folks and hear these voices that will support what we're trying to do through the local governments. Julie?
I think we start by saying it's important to engage these folks in these decisions. Oftentimes we talk about the lived experience, and the unique aspects of a home is that the lived experience is that of the individuals in the home, the employer that wants to have a workforce that's healthy and can show up for work on time, for schools that have the stability of students that aren't transient, because the stability of an education is important for a student's success. So I think the collective of the community's voice is what's necessary, and it will be the assets. From a strengths-based approach, we have a community with assets and will to create an equal opportunity, an equitable opportunity for homes for all.
Great. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
All right, Ben, last word.
So in terms of, there are a couple of things going on here. There's the NIMBY issue. There's the ability of the faith community to engage in this process. Those two can be related to each other. So in the last few seconds that I have here, I'll just slap them together. The faith community can be an incredibly powerful voice in addressing community opposition and generating community support for affordable housing. I would also add that it can support and encourage this issue of equity. Folks who live rooted in faith tend to recognize everyone and are able to support and show up in person to a public hearing, perhaps, to voice support for an affordable housing development. In terms of faith-based development, there is a long track record. This is a thing. We don't need to recreate the wheel. What those faith-based communities need, whether it's a church that owns some property, they need technical assistance, they need to understand the development process, they need to be walked through that process just a little bit, they need to be connected with an experienced developer. And the most powerful thing that that faith community can bring in this particular instance is a whole congregation of people showing up at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night to voice support for a project. And it would just so happen that that faith community would also be bringing the land, which is a fundamental component in any pro forma. So I hope that answers that question. There was a lot going on in it, but I did my best.
Did a great job. And I want to thank all our panelists, CJ Reynolds, Ben Toro-Spears, Julie Rocco, and Evan Johnson. And even though this is the last session in our Homes for Pinellas series, this is only the beginning of the conversation. Moving forward, the Homes for Pinellas series will be part of that larger countywide strategy that Mr. Burton referenced, Advantage Pinellas. Advantage Pinellas is a strategic plan that looks out over the next 25 years, identifying ways we can improve mobility, economic opportunity, housing affordability, and equity countywide. This plan will not only help unify our countywide approach to affordable homes, but will also identify specific ways we can improve our communities and make them safer and more equitable for everyone. So now it's your time to get involved. We encourage you to stay updated with what's going on by checking out our website, www.forwardpinellas.org/Advantage Pinellas. Watch for emails from us announcing the next steps on the Countywide Housing Compact. If you're a member of the public, we'd love for you to be a champion for affordable housing and reach out to your elected officials and show your support. For more information about getting involved, email us at homesforpinellas@pinellascounty.org. If you would like to rewatch this session or any of the first 4 sessions, you can find them at homesforpinellas.org. The video of today's session will be online Monday. Thank you for attending our Homes for Pinellas webinar series. On behalf of Pinellas County, we want to thank all the partners and staff who worked so hard on this program. In normal times, we would have been meeting in person. We couldn't do that now, but this issue was too important to let the events of 2020 slow us down. So that's why we tried something new with this webinar series. We hope you found it helpful, and we look forward to working with all of our partners to create a countywide housing compact. Thank you again for attending, and have a great weekend.